The rain fell in a steady rhythm, a percussive backdrop to the chaos unraveling around me. Crime scenes always seemed to have a way of drawing storms, as if the heavens themselves mourned the lives lost in violent ends. I adjusted the collar of my trench coat and stepped under the glaring red and blue haze of the patrol car lights, my eyes narrowing at the lifeless form sprawled in the mayor's office. "Sam Thorne," I muttered, introducing myself to the forensics tech scribbling notes near the body. She nodded curtly before resuming her work. "Mayor Thomas Kincaid. Dead. A gunshot wound to the chest, blood staining his crisp white shirt and pooling onto the oak floorboards beneath him. The air smelled like copper and cigar smoke, his office littered with toppled furniture. A fight had taken place here, or at least that's what the scene wanted me to believe. The mayor had been hosting a closed-door meeting with members of his own party. The local government had been in turmoil lately, whispers of corruption swirling around like vultures over a fresh kill. I'd been working the case for weeks, trying to untangle the web of bribes, backroom deals, and double crosses that Kincaid had built his empire on. But now, someone had taken matters into their own hands. "Detective," a uniformed officer called from the doorway, his face pale and strained. "We've got the attendees in the conference room. All accounted for." "Good," I replied. "Nobody leaves. Not until I've spoken to each one of them." I knelt beside Kincaid's body, noting the angle of the entry wound and the distance from where his chair had been pushed back. Close range. Personal. Whoever did this didn't just want him dead, they wanted to look him in the eye when they pulled the trigger. "What's the word on the weapon?" I asked the forensics tech. "No gun found at the scene yet," she said, glancing up briefly. "We're still combing through the room." Figures. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment crime. The killer had thought this through, at least enough to ditch the weapon. But nobody walks away from a crime like this without leaving something behind. A fingerprint. A motive. A crack in their alibi. I straightened up and made my way to the conference room. The tension was palpable as I stepped inside. 6 men and women sat around the long table, their faces a mix of fear, shock, and, in at least one case, barely concealed anger. Power players, every one of them. Kincaid's closest allies and most likely enemies. "All right," I began, closing the door behind me. "Let's get one thing straight. The mayor didn't just drop dead from a heart attack. Someone in this room killed him. And until I figure out who, you're all suspects." A woman with sharp features and a navy blazer crossed her arms, her voice cutting through the tense silence. "Detective, this is outrageous. We're grieving the loss of our colleague, and you're treating us like criminals?" "Spare me the outrage," I shot back. Mayor Kincaid wasn't exactly a saint. If any of you think I'm buying the grief act, you're underestimating me. Let's start simple. Names and your version of tonight's events. The introductions began reluctantly. Elaine Morrow, deputy mayor and longtime confidant of Kincaid. Victor Haynes, treasurer with a reputation for cutting corners. Patricia Lowell, head of the city council, who had a public feud with the mayor just last week. The list went on, each name accompanied by a layer of intrigue and enough skeletons to fill a graveyard. "Did anyone leave the room during the meeting?" I asked, leaning against the table as I scanned their faces. No one answered at first, but the silence stretched too long, and guilt tends to find its way into the cracks. "Patricia stepped out," Victor said finally, his voice low. "Said she needed a drink of water. I did no such thing." Patricia snapped, her cheeks flushing. "Victor's lying because he knows I've been pushing to audit his department." "Enough," I said, raising a hand to cut off the brewing argument. "Patricia, did you leave the room or not?" She hesitated, her eyes darting toward the others. "I stepped out for less than a minute. But when I came back, everything was fine." "Fine?" Elaine's voice rose, trembling. "Thomas was murdered, Patricia. How can you say everything was fine?" I made a note to follow up on Patricia's story. In cases like this, the truth was always a patchwork of lies, misdirection, and half-truths. It was my job to stitch it together, or tear it apart. Anyone else have a sudden urge to take a walk? I asked, letting the sarcasm drip. No takers this time. I didn't expect there to be. The door opened behind me, and the forensics tech poked her head in. Detective Thorne, we found something in the trash bin outside the office. Looks like the murder weapon. My pulse quickened. Bag it and run prints. And let me know the caliber. I turned back to the suspects, their faces a mix of apprehension and defiance. The game had changed. Someone in this room thought they could outsmart me. I was about to prove them wrong. I gave the group a hard look, gauging their reactions. The weapon turning up would either flush the killer out or force them deeper into their performance. Either way, the mask would slip eventually. While we're waiting on the results, I said, sliding into a seat at the head of the table, let's dig into why each of you was here tonight. Closed-door meetings usually mean one thing in a city like this, damage control. What was the agenda? Elaine's lips tightened, her gaze darting to the others as if seeking consensus. No one offered any. Finally, she said, the mayor called us together to discuss strategy. The accusations against him were mounting, and he wanted us to present a united front. Strategy, huh? I said. And by that, you mean figuring out who was next to take the fall? Her eyes narrowed. You're twisting my words. Maybe. Or maybe I'm just saying out loud what everyone in this room was already thinking. I leaned forward, letting my voice drop a notch. You were all loyal to Kincaid until it stopped being convenient. So, tell me, who decided it was easier to put a bullet in him than to take the heat? Detective, this is absurd, Victor interjected, his tone oily. None of us would do something so barbaric. We're politicians, not criminals. Funny how often those two overlap, I muttered, earning a few glares. You, Victor. Let's talk about your department. Word is the mayor had started asking questions about some missing funds. Care to comment? His composure slipped, just for a moment. Those are baseless rumors. My books are clean. Clean enough to survive an audit? I asked. He didn't answer. Before I could press further, the door creaked open again. The forensics tech returned, holding a clear evidence bag with a sleek, black pistol inside. She handed it to me with a grim expression. .38 caliber, she said. No prints on the grip or trigger, but we did find something interesting. She pointed to a faint smudge on the barrel. It's a partial print, likely from when the killer stashed the gun. We're running it now, but it might take a while. Good work, I said, setting the bag down on the table where everyone could see it. The sight of the weapon seemed to drain the color from more than one face. Let's cut to the chase, I said, standing and pacing slowly around the room. Someone in this room pulled the trigger. You thought you could cover your tracks, but mistakes always get made. And trust me, I'll find them. I stopped behind Patricia, who stiffened under my gaze. You left the room, I said. Did you see anyone else in the hallway? Hear anything? Her hands gripped the table's edge. No. It was quiet. I just went to the restroom and came straight back. Convenient, I said, moving on. Elaine, what about you? You've been awfully quiet for someone who claims to have been the mayor's right hand. Her jaw tightened. I didn't leave the room, and I have nothing to hide. Thomas was like family to me. Family, I repeated. Funny, considering the rumors about your, extracurricular relationship with him. Maybe he was planning to replace you, and you didn't take it well? Her face reddened. That's a lie. I moved on, stopping at the end of the table where Victor Saturday and you, Treasurer Haynes. Let's say those rumors about the mayor digging into your finances are true. How much money are we talking? Enough to kill over? Victor shifted uncomfortably but didn't answer. That silence told me plenty. As I continued circling the room, the forensics text radio crackled. She stepped out to take the call, and a moment later, she returned with a triumphant look. "Detective," she said, "we've got a match on the partial print." The room went deathly silent. I crossed my arms and turned to her. "Who?" Her eyes flicked toward one of the suspects. "It's his," she said, pointing. The room erupted in gasps, accusations flying as everyone turned on the accused. I kept my gaze locked on the tech. "Are you certain?" I asked. She nodded. "It's a match." I turned back to the suspect, who was already stammering out denials. But their face said it all, the panic, the dawning realization that their web of lies was unraveling. "Care to explain how your print ended up on the murder weapon?" I asked, my voice cold. "Or should we skip to the part where you lawyer up?" It wasn't over yet, not by a long shot. But the noose was tightening, and I wasn't letting go until I had the truth. The accused suspect, Victor Haynes, shot to his feet, his face pale as a ghost. "This is ridiculous," he sputtered. "I've never seen that gun in my life. Someone's framing me." "Framing you?" I repeated, my voice calm but laced with steel. "Funny how your print just happens to show up on the murder weapon. Care to explain that?" Victor's eyes darted around the room, searching for an ally. None of the others met his gaze. Elaine shifted uncomfortably in her seat, while Patricia folded her arms, glaring daggers at him. The rest wore expressions ranging from shock to grim satisfaction. No one was coming to his defense. I didn't do it," Victor stammered. "I swear. I touched the gun earlier, but only because Thomas asked me to." I raised an eyebrow. "He asked you to touch the gun?" Victor nodded frantically. "Yes. He said he found it in his desk drawer and wanted me to check if it was real or a replica. I barely handled it for a second before I gave it back to him." The excuse was desperate, but it had a ring of truth, or at least enough to warrant digging deeper. I leaned in, narrowing my eyes. "And you didn't think to mention this sooner because—" Victor hesitated, his mouth opening and closing like a fish gasping for air. I didn't think it was important. I didn't know he'd be killed." "Convenient," I said, my tone dripping with skepticism. "But let's test your story. Elaine, you were close to the mayor. Ever see him with that gun?" She shook her head, her lips pressed into a thin line. "No. Thomas hated firearms. He wouldn't even allow his security detail to carry them in the office." "That's true," Patricia chimed in. "He was adamant about it after that protest shooting last year." "Victor's lying." Victor's face turned a deeper shade of red. "She's the liar. She's the one who left the room. If anyone had a chance to kill him, it was her." The room erupted into chaos, voices overlapping in a cacophony of accusations and denials. I let it go on for a moment, watching, listening. People reveal themselves in moments like these. It's not just what they say, it's how they say it, who they point fingers at, and who they avoid looking at altogether. "Enough," I barked, slamming my hand on the table. The room fell silent. Before I could press further, my phone buzzed. It was the forensics team again. I stepped into the hallway to take the call. "What do you have?" I asked. "We ran a deeper analysis on the gun," the tech said. "Found something unusual. There's a faint smear of lipstick on the grip." "Lipstick?" I repeated, glancing back toward the conference room. "Any idea who it belongs to?" "Not yet. We'll need a sample to confirm." I ended the call and stepped back into the room, my eyes scanning the group. Patricia's lipstick was a muted red, subtle but noticeable. Elaine wore none, but her demeanor was sharp, calculated. "All right," I said, addressing the group. "New development. We found traces of lipstick on the gun. So, unless Victor has a secret habit he hasn't mentioned, I'd say our killer has some explaining to do." Patricia's face drained of color, and Elaine's hands clenched the edge of the table. Neither spoke, but the tension between them was palpable. I walked around the table, stopping behind Patricia. You left the room, I said, my voice low and deliberate. And now there's evidence that ties a woman to the weapon. Care to revise your story? She stood abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. I didn't kill him. Yes, I stepped out, but only for a minute. When I came back, Thomas was alive. Alive? I said, catching the slip. How could you know he was alive if you didn't see him again? Patricia froze, her eyes wide. I just assumed. You assumed wrong, I cut her off. And now you're caught. Elaine stood suddenly, her voice trembling but defiant. This is absurd. Patricia didn't kill Thomas. She doesn't have it in her. If you want the truth, detective, maybe you should be looking at me. The room went silent as everyone turned to Elaine. Her shoulders sagged, and for the first time, she looked more tired than angry. I found the gun in his desk earlier tonight, she confessed. I didn't know what to do with it. I thought if I could get rid of it, maybe it would stop all the madness, the threats, the corruption, everything. But when I saw him arguing with Victor, I panicked. I thought he was going to use it. So I grabbed it. She took a shaky breath, her eyes glistening. I didn't mean to pull the trigger. It just happened. And then I hid the gun and came back to the meeting, hoping no one would notice. Victor looked at her in stunned silence, while Patricia's expression turned from anger to disbelief. I stepped closer, my voice soft but firm. Why confess now, Elaine? Because it's over, she said, tears spilling down her cheeks. I can't live with it anymore. Thomas was a monster, but I didn't have the right to end his life. Do what you have to, detective. I nodded, signaling the uniformed officer outside. Elaine didn't resist as they placed her in handcuffs. The room remained silent as she was led away. As I stood there, the rain still drumming against the windows, I couldn't help but feel a pang of regret. Justice had been served, but at what cost? In the world of politics, no one ever came out clean, not even those who claimed to stand for what was right.